Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on human trafficking. I am Ariana Nunez, Program Manager for the Peer Health Educator Training at the Central Jersey Family Health Consortium. And we have two very special guests with us today who are going to educate us all on human trafficking and all the information that we need to know as we continue working as peer health educators, as community providers, as future healthcare providers, and as citizens of our communities. So we have Debbie Rasica and Diana Stars, who are going to be our educators for today, as you guys can see them. And before we get started, if you have not already, please complete this pre-survey. It's very short, it's only a few questions. And I will put that in the chat box for you all. If you have any issues, please let me know. If I can type. And you should be able to click that. Oh, it doesn't want to be an easy link. Okay. Yes, so I put that link inside the chat box. You're going to probably hear me say this a couple more times as we are waiting for everyone to log in to today's session. Please be sure to complete the pre-survey, and I will also provide the post-survey at the end of this webinar as well as via email. Once you complete both the pre and post surveys, you will receive your certificate of participation for this webinar. Please let me know if you have any questions. And also, so everybody knows, we are recording today's session. So please feel free to share any questions, comments, experiences that you would like. But I will not be sharing any names so we can keep everything as confidential as possible. Yes. Hello. And just so everybody knows also, I am the only one who can see the chat box. Oh, no worries. I will send you the link. I'm unsure why this link is so long, but at the very top of it all, oh, it's to keep it secure. In case you can't click on the link, just copy and paste it into your browser. And that will do my best to make it easier. There we go. Yeah, I put the pre-survey link in there again, so you don't have to see all that extra stuff in the chat box. Oh, awesome. Yes. So if you already took the pre-test yesterday, you are ahead of the game. So thank you so much. No, yeah, it's just the first time. You don't need to take it again. Thank you for taking it yesterday. So we'll get started in another minute or two, just so we make sure that everyone has enough time to log in and complete that pre-survey. And for those of you who have taken the peer health educator training and you're attending this webinar, this does work for that requirement for your level 2 certificate in order, to watch the 6 live webinars or 8 archived webinars. So thank you. I see a lot of peer health educators joining us today. I think we'll give everyone another minute. And also, we are hopefully, well, very soon, we'll be able to provide a part 2 to this webinar. I know Diana and Debbie will be able to speak on that. So really, this webinar is really to help provide you all with a great foundation on what is human trafficking, and some other information that's really relevant and important for everyone to have a better understanding of this topic. And we will definitely be able to provide a part 2 to allow for more interaction and really practicing these skills. So we can have more tools in our peer health educator tool belt. All right. So I think we have a lot of information to get through today, and I want to make sure Debbie and Diana have plenty of time to educate us all, as well as answer any questions that you all may have. So I think without further ado, I'd like to more formally present our guest speakers for today, Debbie Rasica and Diana Starrett. I will take my camera off and give it to you guys. Thank you.
Okay, so welcome everybody. Before we switch over to the slides, my name is Diana. I work at Robert Wood Johnson as the Injury Prevention Coordinator, and I also am on the New Jersey Coalition Against Human Trafficking Healthcare Committee. I'm one of the co-chairs and the training coordinator for the Speakers Bureau. And I'm going to let Debbie introduce herself in just a minute, but I do want to say that we are really glad that you're here. We hope that you walk away with a lot of new information. We hope that we're going to dispel some of those myths that you might think human trafficking is, and that you will be motivated to join us in the fight against human trafficking. And Debbie, go for it.
Hi, thanks, Diana. Real quick, I'm Debbie Rasica. I work at the Central Jersey Family Health Consortium, coordinating the Perinatal Addiction Prevention Project. And I also am part of the New Jersey Coalition Against Human Trafficking and part of the Speakers Bureau, as you could see, and really delighted to be here today to be able to really share this important information with you. So Diana, all yours.
Okay. I encourage you to put questions in the chat or comments in the chat. Ariana will be moderating the chat box, so you don't feel like you need to wait till the end, although we will have time for Q&A at the end. At that time, you might be able to even unmute yourself and be able to actually ask a question, but please feel free to comment and put information into the chat. All right, so hopefully everybody can see my screen. Whoops, of course, no. Okay. So as Debbie and I both said, we are part of the New Jersey Coalition Against Human Trafficking, and part of the mission of the coalition is to get out and educate as many people as we can. And because Debbie and I are on the healthcare committee, we focus on the healthcare arena, and anybody who is in the healthcare, any of healthcare disciplines, whether it's social work, public health, doctors, physicians, it doesn't matter, okay? We just feel like it's really important for everyone in healthcare to understand human trafficking, because there's been some research done with survivors, and the research shows us that at least 80% of survivors encounter someone in healthcare while they're being trafficked, and nobody says anything. Nobody questions, nobody recognizes. And I truly believe it's because people don't know what it is and they don't know what to do about it. So our education hopes to be able to give you that information and that confidence to be able to help the person in front of you. So just to start off, so we are all on the same page, I am going to read a definition to you, and I promise I won't do a whole lot of reading while we're going through the presentation, but I want you to understand what human trafficking is. And this is the definition that's out there. Human trafficking is the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person through the use of force, fraud, or coercion. And those three words are really important. And this is for the purpose of either forced labor or sexual exploitation. And it does take many, many forms. So the first one that we'll talk about is sex trafficking. And we, that's the one that you hear the most about in the media. Certainly when you hear human trafficking, I think most people think about sex trafficking. So sex trafficking involves a person that is performing some sort of commercial sex act. And that is happening because of force, fraud, or coercion. Okay, so those words really help us to define the crime, and that's why they're so important. This happens in a lot of different places. It can happen in fake massage businesses. It can happen through escort services. We have residential brothels right here in New Jersey. Oftentimes it's happening on public streets. It happens in schools, and it happens in families. We had a case of human trafficking a year and a half ago in an East Brunswick hotel, and there was a 16-year-old from Allentown, New Jersey being trafficked. So it happens in many, many different places. And basically, I would just say everywhere. And we're going to talk more about each of these. Labor trafficking is the other arm of human trafficking. And this is when a person, again, is forced or coerced into performing labor services. And this can include things like involuntary child labor, forced labor. It can involve be something like debt bondage. And this usually happens when there's a person brought over from another country and they are told, come to the United States. We will give you a job. We'll give you a place to live. You just need to, pay this amount and come on over, and you'll be able to send money home to your family. And when they get here, that is not the case. Oftentimes that person is living in horrible conditions. They're not getting fed well. They certainly are not getting paid. And when they try to get out of that situation, the person who brought them over says, you owe me. I got you to the United States and you have this debt to pay off. And in reality, they'll never be able to pay that debt off. So when we talk about debt bondage, that is what we are talking about. We in New Jersey have some industries that really support labor trafficking. Our agricultural industry is one. Our hospitality industry is another. We have people who end up in servitude, domestic servitude in New Jersey. So there are a lot of different ways that labor trafficking can happen, but know that it is happening here in the United States and specifically happening in New Jersey. We had a case last year at Robert Wood where there was a crash out on 287 in South Plainfield, and there was a cargo van involved, and all of the occupants of that cargo van ended up coming to the emergency department. There were 4 children sitting in the back of this cargo van and 2 adults in the front. The 2 adults claimed to be the aunt and uncle for the kids. We found out they were not. They were coming from a warehouse in South Plainfield where they had worked overnight. All the kids had been there all night long, and supposedly they were going to school when this crash happened. The kids could not tell us the address or the name of the warehouse. They told us that they did not get paid. And as it turned out, the family members did show up for these kids. So the 2 that were driving, I don't know that they ever really figured it out. But that is potentially a labor trafficking situation. So again, happens in many, many different ways. And I mentioned the words force, fraud, or coercion, and they are super important when we're talking about human trafficking as a crime, and also how traffickers get their identify and get their victims to be part of this horrific crime. So when we talk about force, fraud, or coercion, we're really talking about threats of violence, maybe promises of false love. Oftentimes, just like in a domestic violence situation or in a sexual assault situation, sometimes in interpersonal violence, those kinds of situations, the person will say, well, I love him, he loves me. So those are things that happen in human trafficking also. Sometimes there's offers of jobs that really are fake, threats to family. So all of those things that I just mentioned can lead to labor or sex trafficking. And again, I talked about, forcing people to be working in an agricultural setting in New Jersey, where they may be given a place to live. They're living in some warehouse with, a cot on the floor and barely enough food and barely getting paid, if anything. That is labor trafficking. And that does happen here in New Jersey, unfortunately. Even something like pornography can be considered sex trafficking if there was force, fraud, or coercion. So keep all of that in mind as we're going through, and remember that typically there is little or no money paid to those victims, all right? Usually none. So minors are a bit of a different story. I will tell you, and I'll speak from the perspective of working in the hospital, that if we encounter a patient that we think may be involved with human trafficking and they are under 18, then our role in the hospital is to call in DCP&P, used to be DIFUS, and they are trained. All of DCP&P's field workers have gotten training in human trafficking, and they will come and assess the situation, and they will figure out what those next steps are. But in New Jersey, sex trafficking and labor trafficking of minors is considered a child abuse offense. So that's why we call in DCP&P. All right, they are trained to handle these things. Now, if we're talking somebody who's 18 or older, it's a different story. Because just like a person who might be involved in an abusive relationship, whether they're married or it's, a boyfriend or girlfriend, we cannot do anything for that person unless they want us to. So minors are a bit different in that even if they are willing participants, because remember, sometimes teens will and youth will participate in what we call survival sex. They have no roof over their head. They don't know where their next meal is coming. Maybe they're a runaway. Maybe they just don't have a great home life, and they are trying to please this new boyfriend. They may actually participate. It appears that they're willing, but it doesn't matter, because if they are under 18 years old, it is considered a crime of human trafficking, even if there is money exchanged and that person gets, that victim ends up getting money. So as a minor, you don't have to have force, fraud, or coercion. It's still considered a human trafficking crime. And that is a big difference between an adult and a minor when we talk about this. If there's any questions, please put them into the chats, because I know sometimes when you're hearing this for the first time, it's like, what? It's a little confusing. But just know that minors are considered victims regardless of any of the other circumstances that are happening, okay? And then, why does this happen? Well, it happens because the driving force behind any business, and this is a business, is money. This is the fastest growing and second largest crime on a global level. It's second only to drug trafficking, and it's equal in scope to gun trafficking. And, we hear about drug trafficking and gun trafficking a lot. We certainly don't hear so much about people being trafficked. But if you think about the money end of this, and you think about the fact that we know just from our statistics that this is a big crime equal to gun trafficking, well, think about it. How does that happen? And I'm going to tell you why. Because when you sell drugs, you sell them once. And when you sell guns, you sell them once. But you can sell people over and over and over again. And I remember watching a documentary where there was a former pimp talking, and he was talking about the 6 women that he had called them girls, his girls, 6 girls that he had working for him. And he had girls working for him 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And in 1 year, this person made over $1.5 million through trafficking these 6 women. So there's a great lure there, right? I mean, if I knew I was going to make $1.5 million, I wouldn't personally, but obviously there are people out there that think this is okay to do. And this is what really drives this. When there is demand, there will always be supply. Okay, so just to keep in mind, this is a big business. And then here's the first myth I would like to dispel for you. When I first started learning about this, because of the name human trafficking, I assumed that a person needed to be moved across state lines or country lines in order to be trafficked, but that is not true. Many victims remain in the same town or the same state and are trafficked for years from the same place. Sometimes, yes, traffickers will move around within a city or within a state because they try to stay away from enforcement. And if they think that law enforcement is getting close, they may move around. But it doesn't require you to be moved. There are many victims that are trafficked from their schools. There are many victims that are trafficked from their families, and they're never moved. So know that human trafficking does not require physical movement. That's a really important piece of this. So where's this happening? So we're going to first look all over the world, right? And I'm not going to read these statistics. And there's also one thing I want to say about statistics. There are many different organizations and agencies that collect numbers about human trafficking. Keep in mind that they're only collecting numbers about cases we know about. So there are many, many cases that we never, ever hear about. Part of the issue is that a lot of the agencies that collect these numbers collect lots of different kinds of numbers, and they don't talk to each other. So you'll see that we've got Polaris Project as one of our agencies that we do use statistics from, Human Rights First and the International Labor Organization. They are trusted organizations, but again, the numbers are not, they're not very representative of everything that's happening around human trafficking. The two numbers I do want to point out here, which I think are important, remember this is on a global level, is that on a global level, about 80% of the cases we know about are forced labor, and about 20% are sex trafficking. And I want you to keep those numbers in mind, because when we look at nationally, what we find is it flips, and about 30% are forced labor and 70% are sexual exploitation. So those numbers are different when we look at something in the, when we look at this topic in the United States. And here's myth 2, which I say this was myth 2 for me. About 80% of sex trafficking survivors are US citizens. And I think for many, many people who don't know a lot about this topic, when you think human trafficking, you think people from other countries. This happens over there, or even if it's happening here, it's not happening to US citizens. And that is not the case. When we look at trafficking survivors, sex trafficking survivors, 80% of them are US citizens. About the other 20% are labor trafficking. And the other thing that we find is that 80% out of those sex trafficking survivors, that the majority of them are women and children. There are boys involved too, most definitely, probably about 20% are men and boys, but the overwhelming majority of sex trafficking survivors are women. When we look at labor trafficking, those numbers kind of flip-flop, and we see about 70% are men and 30% are women. And I say men and boys, women and girls, just male, say male and female, all right? Just so that you get the idea that those numbers are different when we're talking about trafficking versus labor trafficking. And then here's our little state of New Jersey, right? We're just this little state, but guess what? We have a lot of human trafficking going on. I'm just gonna back up for a minute. I just wanna say that this number, this 11,500 number, are the number of human trafficking cases that were reported to the National Hotline in 2019. We don't have 2020 numbers yet, but these are the cases that were reported. And remember, again, there are so many cases that go unreported. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the hotline in the next slides because it's going to be a really important resource for you. Now, back to New Jersey. In 2019, about 250 of those 11,500 came from New Jersey. That's up 10% from 2018. And I went back and looked at the human trafficking hotline data from 2008 to 2018. And in those years, 2019 wasn't up when I had looked at this, but in those 10 years, New Jersey was in the top 10 of states with calls to the hotline. So our little state is in the top 10. I don't think we want to be in the top 10. Either that or we really want our numbers to climb because we're doing such a good job at educating people that more people are aware and more people are calling the hotline. But the bottom line is that we've got an issue here, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a few slides. I do want to say that there's an organization called Dream Free that ran for 6 years And they looked at their data. They assisted 800 survivors over that 6 years across the state of New Jersey. And what they found was that 80% of their clients were US citizens. So I want to point that out because that validates what we know on the bigger picture from nationally, that about 80% of sex trafficking survivors are US citizens. 90% of Dream Free's clients were sex trafficking survivors. So it just sort of validates that myth or misconception that we have that most of our victims are not US citizens. We know that that is not the case. So when we talk about who is human trafficking, I think the biggest thing for me is that we want you to know that human trafficking can affect anyone. Anyone can be a victim. And there's no one consistent face to human trafficking. Trafficked persons in the United States can be men or women or children. They can be foreign nationals. They can be US citizens. Some are very well educated and some have no education at all. It is a crime and it can affect anyone regardless of their race or their nationality, their age, their socioeconomic background, their gender. It doesn't matter. It can affect anyone. And while anyone can be a victim of human trafficking, of course, there are certain populations that are more vulnerable, and especially this applies to our youth, our minors. Think about the fact that our brain doesn't finish developing until we're about 25. And the part of the brain that doesn't finish developing until that time is the part that helps us to make good decisions and use judgment. And we know how youth are around other topics. So just imagine, how that brain development or lack thereof can affect a youth's judgment when it comes to making friends and trusting people, because that's really what human trafficking, ends up being about. It's kind of an interesting phenomenon that we end up with, that, we really are, as youth, we're really vulnerable to this. We might, as youth, maybe we are undocumented immigrants, maybe we're runaway or homeless youth. Of course, these populations are going to be much more vulnerable. If you belong to a marginalized community, certainly you may end up being more vulnerable. But the bottom line is that we all can help to prevent it, which is why we get out to do this education, right? This is why you are here today, and which is why we hope that you're going to take what you're learning today and you are going to share it. Not only share it with the people that you know, friends and family and colleagues and other students, but also to really get the word out to just all of your networks, to make sure that we're all learning together and that we all can recognize what's happening, because that is the way that we are going to be able to prevent this from happening. So I'm going to play a video. It's about 5 minutes long. This is a tough topic, so I encourage you to, take a little time for self-care. We're going to take a little breather when this is over, but please do, watch. And just as a preface, this is a video that is taking place. It's a visual representation of trafficking in West Michigan. And I will tell you, I am geographically challenged, but I do know where Michigan is. And I do know that Michigan is an enormous state. And this is just about one part of West Michigan. And the whole population of Michigan is the same as that of New Jersey. So just keep that in mind when you are watching this, because I think it sort of gives a frame of reference.
You just take a seat. All right. Thank you so much for coming in. I'm Mary, by the way.
Mary, tonight.
Nice to meet you. Don't mind the giant microphone above your head.
I'll try not to.
There are 3 photos in front of you. If you could just pick one, it doesn't really matter which one it is, and show that one to us.
All right.
Could you describe her to us?
She looks youthful. I feel like this is one of those situations where if I say he's 23, then he's actually going to be 16.
Hispanic, maybe not full, but part. Similar to me, actually.
Well, I mean, she's young, so probably has a lot of things to look forward to.
I would describe him as friendly.
She looks, happy. She doesn't look shy, but confident.
Anything she puts her mind to, she could achieve.
We actually have his story. If you could read that out loud to us.
Okay, Marcus. I grew up really close to my parents. Adriana. I grew up with my brother and sister.
Amy. I remember watching the Olympics on TV when I was 5 and being totally in awe of the sprinters.
I was the middle child and easily the quietest.
I felt like no one ever saw me or cared.
Dad was too drunk to keep a job, and he never even saw me unless I was in his way.
Mom worked 2 jobs to make sure we had food for every meal, so she was never here to know when he would hit us.
One day when I went to the mall, like I like to do to be out of the house, a man came up to me and told me I was beautiful and asked me on a date.
On our first date, he drove me around in his car and said we could eat whatever I wanted.
Every time we were together, he bought me something new.
Tom really cared about me, and Tom really made me feel special.
I was in love with him.
After only going out for 3 weeks, Tom offered me a way out of my home, asked me to move in with him.
So when he asked me to have sex with him, I did.
He would put his hand over my face until I couldn't breathe.
Tom had friends over pretty regularly, and I could tell that some of his friends were into me.
So I kept my door locked and hoped that no one would bother me. After a few nights of crashing there, he said that I still owed him for letting me stay at his place.
He said he had a friend who wanted to spend an hour with me.
He told me I might have to do some stuff, but not to worry about it. It's not a big deal.
When I didn't want to, he slapped me and said no one ever cared about me like he did.
But I didn't know what else to do because I needed a place to stay.
His friends forced themselves on me and took turns while he watched.
One by one, they'd come down to the basement, telling me how pretty I am.
When they're on top of me, I just close my eyes and pretend I'm running.
I'm exhausted and I don't know what to do.
My name is Adriana, I'm 16 years old.
My name is Marcus. I'm 14 years old. My name is Amy. I'm 12 years old.
I live in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
And I live in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
And I live in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
That was very different than what I thought. Especially because like being a girl and imagining like if that was me, like that's, I don't even know. I can't even imagine what that would be like. She deserves to be a kid, just like what she is in this picture.
It being so close to home is something that makes me want to jump out of this chair.
I wouldn't think that Grand Rapids is a place where anything like this would ever happen.
Because you don't want it to happen to anybody, and you really don't want it to happen to people that live where you live.
Thank you for sharing her story with us. I'd like to show you something if you wouldn't mind taking her picture and following me to the gym.
Oh, wow.
I expected something certainly a lot smaller.
Bar graphs and numbers, and but these are actual people. I don't know, in like my world, in my bubble or whatever, we don't talk about this. It's not something you think about.
You know, what we see is only on the surface.
I mean, looking at this, sex trafficking doesn't have any discrimination, that's for sure. Ages, genders, can affect anybody. It hits you right in your heart, your gut, your stomach. It's like, wow. Now it's like I feel like I have this weight of responsibility to see how I can help.
Changes through greater awareness and making people realize that
this does happen here and will continue to happen until we decide to make a stop.
So I want everybody to take a breather. Let's all close our eyes and breathe in. 1, 2, 3, 4, and let it out. And do it again. Again, this is a pretty heavy topic, especially if you are just learning about this for the first time. And this just shows you, relevance to New Jersey with regard to that video. People all had pictures of all different kinds of people and ages and ethnicities and genders, because like we said, this can affect anyone and everyone. And now I'm going to turn the mic over to Debbie, and she will tell you what's going on. Go ahead, Deb.
All right, thanks, Diana. I every time I see that video, it just hits in the heart and hits in the gut. So I think it really does drive home that we are talking about human people's lives, and these are people who are part of our community. And we really need to keep that in mind. This slide is really, it just expresses a couple of cases in New Jersey where perpetrators have been arrested, which is, of course, a wonderful thing. There was one, a couple that, one that happened in 2019 to a 14-year-old New Jersey girl. And she got lured through social media, which we're going to talk a little bit more about later on. But it also happens in suburban homes. There was a couple in 2018 forcing an underage girl into prostitution in hotels right in our state, in Bergen, Essex, and Middlesex counties. So that's just a few examples of what is truly happening, again, in our own backyard. And this is so underreported, as we know, and Diana already mentioned. So if we could move on, please, to the next slide. So why is New Jersey such a hub for human trafficking? Well, we're really prime location. We are the place to live. We're right on that 95 corridor. We have access to all airports, air, sea, roads, trains, all kinds of air traffic as well. And we're densely populated. Look at that, that comparison between our population and the population of Michigan. Pretty extraordinary, and what we saw on that wall. And of course, we're also close to major cities like New York and Philly, and we have wonderful tourist attractions like Atlantic City. So New Jersey always has traffic moving in and out for so many reasons. So it is a perfect setup, not only for human trafficking, but as Diana mentioned earlier, gun trafficking and drug trafficking as well. So next slide, please. Okay, and Diana mentioned a lot of this, and it's really just important to emphasize again that predators really prey on those people that have any vulnerabilities. It's almost like folks who are searching for substances. They can go to any strange city, and if they really want to get what they need, they're going to find it, and they're going to be able to find it pretty quickly. Predators just know who to target, and many of these we talked about. Diana mentioned that underage brain that is so gullible and impressionable. And it's usually, we have to understand that there's often trauma before a person is trafficked. And often that means that needs are not only not being met at home, but they may also be being abused physically, emotionally, psychologically. Maybe they are not even having a decent place to sleep, a safe place, food, as Diana mentioned. All these things certainly create more vulnerability. Okay. So if we're, again, just to re-emphasize how trafficking comes in so many different styles, and it really comes from a perpetrator really grooming and forming a bond with the person that they're choosing to traffic, whether it's false love, as Diana mentioned. Even, kids used to sell candy and magazines a lot more often than you see them going door to door now, right? Girl Scouts don't go door to door selling their cookies anymore. It's a little bit too scary and unsafe. Survival sex was mentioned by Diana, as well as familial trafficking. People will traffic their own family members, and I know that's horrific to hear, but it really can be happening, and again, in your own backyard. So next slide, please. Okay, so Diana mentioned coercion early. So what are some coercive tactics? Well, after you get a lot of gifts, now you owe me, or I put a roof over your head, or I've given you food, no one else would take you, no one else would love you, you're unwanted. And it really is a reinforcement of powerlessness, and the perpetrator is in a position of control. And often folks feel really enslaved by the horrors of what's going on, and often forced to take drugs to be able to stay more under the control of their perpetrator. Often they really feel so isolated and have nowhere to go, and their will is broken. The more a perpetrator takes over the will and the reality of the person that they're abusing, the less and less that person is able to maintain their own self and identity. And it really can be a horrible journey, and we have to understand that everybody's journey is going to be very different through this. And we might wonder, why don't folks just get out if it's so horrible? But if you really feel you have no resources, absolutely nowhere to go, or your family's being threatened if you leave, or your pets or your children, the list goes on. These are just some examples of the way that these master manipulators really just put out, their ability to just snag folks in, and usually when they're most needy. So thanks, Diana. Next slide. Okay, these are just some red flags that we all can look at. Diana mentioned in the beginning, the point of this education is for us all to be able to learn how to recognize and then figure out how can we help, what can we do about it. It was asked in the chat if over 18 we're not allowed to help somebody unless they want help. That was a really great question. One of the things we have to be really careful of is making sure that we keep people safe. And those who are being trafficked often don't know they're being trafficked. The denial system is so great, and their own sense of lack of identity and self-esteem is so overwhelming that there just doesn't feel like there can be any escape. But we can look for signs, and we should all have this number. If you want, pull out your phones, and we should all have this National Human Trafficking Hotline number in our phones. We can always call this number if we suspect anything and just report or just get information, okay? Or those themselves who would like to reach out for help for themselves can certainly reach out whenever they feel it might be safe to call. So these are just a few red flags. Someone who is really reluctant to speak, almost, looking towards the other person if it's okay to talk before they talk. Seemingly real exhausted, very controlled, usually if they're with their perpetrator, very fearful, really working long hours, and they might not even see any of what they're making, except what the perpetrator chooses to give them to stay alive. Often they're alienated from all people they know and love. And those gifts, like, how do young people end up with these beautiful gifts? It might be a sign that they're being trafficked. And of course, there's signs of abuse. Many folks in their journey will end up going through the healthcare system, the medical system, needing attention. And we need to be able to just listen to our guts when we see these red flags. And if we can, really to pass on that information. And certainly, in working with all the people you work with, to kind of go in more and really realize that people aren't always what they seem. So if things don't seem right, we're all pretty sensitive. We choose to work in this field. Tap into that and recognize with, as much compassion as you can that that person in front of you may have been trafficked themselves. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay. So what are we doing in New Jersey specifically? Diana mentioned both of us are part of the New Jersey Coalition Against Human Trafficking. We really do a lot, but our mission is really to bring all our communities together throughout the state so that we can really end human trafficking. We really network with a whole lot of people. We're already made up of over 180 organizations as well as individual volunteers. Every person of every profession and age you could imagine is part of our rainbow of members of this coalition, and it's really remarkable. So if you would like to ever join something that's incredibly worthwhile, please feel free to come on board and see what we're about. We're always looking for new talent and new passion. So next slide, please. Okay, I think we can probably go through this. And again, so what are we about as a coalition? We connect. That's one of our missions is to really connect and get this message out to as many people as we can through education and different events. And we really want to also advocate strongly for new legislation and different calls to action. We want to help the voiceless have a voice, because the voiceless are truly resilient, amazing people. And hopefully with the help in the right place at the right time, they can move through this horrible journey of all these things we're talking about that are so terrible and really come out on the other side as a person in recovery, a real survivor. And what we can do is we can know about this. We can take this education we're learning today and realize that you're forever changed. You now know that this exists, and it does in our own backyards. And somewhere along the line, whether it's in our private lives, our work worlds, out in our communities, whatever hat we're wearing, we can really make a difference. So that's our job. We connect with you all and educate, and hopefully you've been finding this educational, and that advocacy is really important as well. So next slide, Diana. Okay, so really, we went through these pretty quickly, so we definitely have time to have comments and answer any questions. So again, what can you do? Well, we can really do a lot. You know, anybody can be trafficked, but everybody can help stop trafficking. So please feel free to take this education and maybe whatever interest has been really excited for you today, you can learn more about it. Learn more. Choose fair trade certified products. Diana talked a bit about labor trafficking, and there are actually products, particularly here in New Jersey, that often are coming from people who were involved in labor trafficking, and that's coffee and chocolate. Typically two things most of us really enjoy. But there is a label on products that will say that there was fair trade going on, meaning people, you know, are working for a fairly decent wage and under fair conditions. Feel free to talk to your legislators. It's a powerful thing to do. That's what they're there for. So please feel free to speak up whenever you can. Donation, whether it's your time, your money, anything is absolutely welcome. And again, please take this national hotline number, 888-373-7888, and definitely put that in your phone. You can also text 233-733, be free. And please join us, whether you want to become an educator or a volunteer. Well, we're all volunteers. I don't know if Diana mentioned that as our coalition. We all volunteer our time. This is really a grassroots agency that's grown enormously through the last several years, especially since Diana's been involved. And I think we're really in the forefront as a state to be able to get this education out and really raise awareness. And know that you don't have to fix it. You know, it's our job maybe to listen, be aware. If we're in the right place at the right time, we can pass on this hotline information, and we can help really advocate for the rights of human beings. Nobody deserves to be victimized, but we all deserve to be helped and not invisible in this terrible journey through trafficking, and hoping folks can get to that other side. And many do, which is a wonderful thing. So I think that's about it, right, Diana? Maybe just that one more slide. And again, this just reinforces what we all can do about it. So our new branding really is trying to emphasize, let's create a safer state and let's stop human trafficking. Please visit our brand new website called SaferNewJerseyNJ.org. So that's SaferNJ.org. On that website, you will find a tremendous amount of resources, events, a lot more you can learn about human trafficking. There are books that are recommended that can be read to have a further understanding, whether from the perspective of a survivor or a family member of a survivor. And let's just be not quick to judge, but quick to show compassion and empathy, because truly, many people that we know go through their life hiding all this pain and this trauma, when the more we can just ask that question, how are you today? It really might make a difference. So I think that sort of sums it up. Diana and myself, our information is on the bottom, for anything that we can do to help you. So I guess we can open that up to Diana or Ariana.
Do we have questions in the chat? People want to unmute themselves and talk. I do want everybody on this call to think, Debbie talked about the vulnerabilities of victims. And I just want you all to just take a step back and think about a time in your life that you may have been vulnerable. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you didn't have a roof over your head or you were worried about where your next meal was coming from. Maybe you were in a situation where you didn't feel any, connection to your family. Maybe you didn't have a lot of friends. I mean, sometimes traffickers will get online, especially in this world that we are in right now. They're online, perusing and finding young people who do not have a lot of followers or a lot of friends on social media, and they will target them. Sometimes they're playing video games with them, and you don't know what you're playing with. And they will use those situations to be able to start making connections and start developing a rapport with that younger victim, and also to start getting them to trust them. And that's how this happens. It's not typically that white van with the, tinted windows that's coming by and grabbing people. I mean, not to say that it doesn't happen that way, but there's so many other ways that traffickers identify and go after their victims. And we've all been in places in our lives where we could have been that person, and we just didn't end up being that person. So I think it's really important to keep that in our minds, that none of us are invincible, and we all have been in places where we could have been that trafficked person. I think that helps us to be a little bit more compassionate and to put away our biases and not make judgment. Because I think, certainly for me, when I first came, learning about this, I did have a lot of biases. But you have to learn to put those aside. And especially as peer educators, I think that's super important.
I have to agree with that. Yeah, absolutely. Goes real deep. It's trauma is trauma. So if any of you are feeling any kind of impact and have any comments, I'm not able to see the chat, and not sure how we're doing with, there's Ariana. If folks just have any comments or questions, or anything we could help you with. This is lots of process for sure. Can't hear you. Are you there?
No, we cannot hear you, Ariana.
Better now?
Yes.
Okay, good. You know, sometimes the headphones work, sometimes they don't. But thank you guys so much for all of this information. I see we have a hand up. I don't see, oh. We have a hand up. So if you have any questions, please just type them into the chat box. I know you guys will provide, you know, more opportunities in the future to really help practice these skills. And I mean, it's very rare, I feel, that we see examples of human trafficking, even in the media and things. But one thing that I think of is I watch a lot of Grey's Anatomy, and I remember there was one episode where one of the doctors was like, hey, saw the red flags that you guys mentioned, and he was, you know, sharing this with the other doctors, but they were like, no, everything's fine. You know, this woman is with her because that's like her aunt. But, you know, she was being very reluctant to speak. She had various injuries. So I'm wondering if you can provide some insights and maybe some tips on how can we share this knowledge with others, knowing that not everyone is aware of human trafficking, and they may even be reluctant to consider that that is even an option. So how could we maybe help others also better understand what are the warning signs and what are like respectful ways to ask how someone is doing? I don't know exactly how best to ask that, but
I'm going to say that there's a couple of things. One, I would tell you that on the coalition website, there are printable red flag postcards. Go and print one out, you know, and so you have that readily available to you, because you're not going to remember all of this. There's a lot of information here. So go onto the website, look at the resources that are there, print out the postcards that are there for the red flags so you have them. And all the postcards have the human trafficking hotline on them, just in case you didn't put it into your phone. But I'm assuming by now everybody's got it in their phone. As Debbie mentioned, you can call to report, but you can also call to ask questions. So if you're in the community, let's say, and maybe you're observing something, you're in a park and you're observing something that just looks just not right, and you're you know, you've got little bells going off in your head that, oh wow, I wonder if this is labor, I wonder if this is sex trafficking, whatever it is, you can call them or you can text. You text to Be Free and somebody will be there, and you just text them info and somebody will come back to you and say, what can I help you with? And you can tell them what you're observing and they will help you to determine what's going on. That is just a resource that I just highly recommend that resource, because there are trained professionals who answer the phone 24/7. And if I saw something and I really didn't know what was going on, that's what I would do. We just had a case over the weekend in the hospital where I had the director of social work calling me, and we just weren't sure what to do. And it was because the person was over 18 years old. So it, like I said, turns into a kind of a different story when we're talking about adults. But she ended up calling the National Human Trafficking Hotline to get assistance. And that's what they're there for. So I highly, highly recommend using that as a resource. And then if you're talking about trying to approach somebody, I think you have to be careful, because typically their trafficker is not far away. And you don't want to put yourself in harm's way, and you don't want to put that person in more harm's way. So you really need to be careful about when you're approaching somebody. And I don't think there's an easy way to do it. Even in the hospital, our staff are just beginning to get trained in how to talk to somebody and what are some of the questions that you might pose. You know, we ask in the hospital, everybody, do you feel safe in your home environment? I got to tell you that if I didn't feel safe in my home environment and my trafficker was standing in the room with me, or my abuser was standing in the room with me, I'm not going to say yes. So we need to figure out ways to be able to have that conversation without the other person around. And that's not the easiest thing to do. So I think the first place, and Debbie, feel free to chime in here, would be call the National Human Trafficking Hotline and get some guidance.
Absolutely. And even if we do have some privacy, if we're in whatever situation where, you know, you go in alone for an appointment, I mean, just asking somebody, how are you today? How can I best help you today? They might not say anything. They might say everything's fine, but you know what? You can always leave that window open. Well, you know what? I just have a sense that you could use a little support in your life, and I'm here. So anytime, you know, you want to come back, you want to call, please feel free to do so. And sometimes that'll just get the word out gently. It really depends on our situation, how long a time we have to really build a relationship with someone we're working with. Some of us see people for seconds. Some of us are more educators. Some of us see them over a length of time. Certainly those who see people over a length of time might have more opportunity to get some education in there and really empower folks to be able to call the hotline for themselves, as well as always feel free to call. That's what they're there for. We don't have to be experts. We just have to be sensitive, aware people and notice the person in front of us. You know, sometimes pain and suffering can be pretty visible as long as we're opening our eyes and we're really attending to the person that's in front of us and actively listening. And that's a lot more of what we thought we were gonna, that we will go into the next go around with some case studies and really work at, you know, it's very hard to talk to people about traumatic things, but if we learn to talk with open-ended questions in non-judgmental ways and using correct language, those are all things that we'll be able to get into further. It just sets the atmosphere, the culture that maybe I'm in a safe place and I can trust this person. You know, we can even say, remember, you know, what's said here, especially if it's an adult, it's between you and I. You know, this is between you and I. Of course, as Diana mentioned, if it's minor, it's a different story. We do need to report that. But again, it's about creating a plan of safety. You know, safety is paramount. We're not saving people. Our job is to maybe just help them along the journey of being able to work their way past this kind of trauma. But none of us need to be experts and know how to fix it. We just know how to be kind, and we just have to be gentle and caring. So hope that helps.
Right. And I don't know, Ariana, whether your peer educators have gone through this before, but I think that one of the things that's going to make you more able to approach and talk to somebody is to be able to understand what your biases are. We all have them. You know, we grow up, we have certain things instilled in us by our parents, our friends, our teachers, just the communities that we live in. So we all have biases. And I recently if you get online and just Google Harvard implicit bias test, have your peer educators done this before, Ariana?
No, we haven't done that yet, but that's definitely something I want to make sure to include.
Yeah, I mean, you all can do this. You can get online, just Google, and you'll see there's a whole bunch of tests. They're 5 minutes long. And it really helps to point, if you get on there and you do some of them, you'll see that you'll go, oh, I didn't really realize that I thought that way. And it's a really good way to point out to yourself, to become more aware of what your biases are, what judgments you might make without even knowing that you're doing it, because you can't walk into a situation to try and help anybody, whether it's a victim of human trafficking or anybody, if you're walking in with this judgment face on, right? You have to go in there open-ended. You have to be able to know what it means to be trauma-informed and person-centered. All of those things are important topics and important ways that we learn to interact with people so that they don't feel threatened, so that they feel like you are building that rapport with them and they can trust you. If you know, it's kind of that, my daughter is a tattoo artist. Now, 25 years ago, I would have probably had a heart attack if my daughter said, I'm going to be a tattoo artist, because who walked around with tattoos 25 years ago? It was people who were, you know, ex-convicts, or maybe you got them when you were drunk in the service. You know, it wasn't mainstream. Now it is. That's a bias, right? I had to put that aside when my daughter said, I'm going to become a tattoo artist. And I was like, okay, now she's got lots of tattoos too. So I think, we don't realize a lot of the times what those biases are that we have, and that we make judgment calls without even knowing that we're making it. So it's important for all of us, as educators, as citizens of our community, or healthcare providers, that we are able to put those biases aside and walk into a room and be able to deal with that person where they're at. So I think that's really important.
So we have a couple more questions. Oh, sorry, Nima.
No, go ahead.
Right. So I'll say them both because I'm sure you can answer them both. Well, they're a little different. But so one question is, can you guys touch briefly on gun and drug trafficking? And also, if someone is in the hospital, is the trafficker still there?
I can talk to the second one. I can't talk to the first one at all.
Yeah, certainly we are not experts in drug or gun trafficking. However, I can just say that the 95 Carter is really the drug route. I mean, it's such a direct line connecting cities and also from all the ports. So New Jersey is one of the hubs, I can tell you for sure, for drug trafficking. And I can't speak for gun trafficking other than it's more prevalent than we think, especially with, I think, our present culture. More and more people seem to have guns in their possession. So, you have to get from one place to the next. But the important thing to remember, as Diana pointed out, guns, you sell them, you need new ones to replace them. But humans, you can just sell them again and again and again. You heard that one young account in the video, just one after another, they each used me, and then they did it all over again. So, we're talking real devastating trauma here. But again, if we can just be empathetic people and be present, that in itself is worth a million wonderful things, and always have that national hotline handy. Diana mentioned that red flags that can be printed out. It's a wonderful resource that just kind of goes through what are some warning signs. That's wonderful to use at your educational events or to put in your waiting rooms for people to pick up and see, or wherever you think it might be helpful in your faith-based communities, whatever the case may be. And Diana and I are always here as well. So if you're ever concerned, feel free to reach out to either one of us or Ariana. And we are not experts. We know how to deliver the information, but we're no experts. But now you guys know almost as much as we do, or probably more. So now you can take the sword and run with it and really share this really hard to hear, but really important information with other folks.
And then the second question was about in healthcare. And I will tell you that what our experience has been, and what most healthcare providers who've had these experiences will tell you, is that the trafficker is there. The trafficker, is standing in the room, and when the healthcare provider is asking questions of the patient, the trafficker is the one that's answering those questions. And that's one of those red flags, right? Being controlled, unable to speak. That unable is not because they can't speak, it's because the trafficker doesn't let them. Sometimes you'll ask a patient a question and they will look to the trafficker to see if it's okay to answer or what they should be saying. A lot of times stories don't even coincide. Sometimes the patient can't tell you where they live because they don't know the address. So what do we do in those situations? We have to be really creative in figuring out ways to get that patient alone. So there's a couple of things that other providers have said. They might make up that this person needs to go for some kind of a test in radiology, even if they don't. Come on, we're going to go get an MRI. We're going to go to X-ray, because once you walk into the room where that X-ray is happening, no one else is allowed to be in there, not even parents. So that's a way to get that patient alone and perhaps be able to start that conversation. But again, you have to have comfort level to be able to start that conversation. The other thing that we are actually just talking about implementing in our hospital system throughout Robert Wood Johnson Barnabas Health is that we are going to post on the back of the bathroom door, patient bathroom doors. So only patients use these bathrooms. And typically it's because we need them to go give us a urine sample. So on the back of the patient door in our emergency departments, we're going to try and really push this out to our urgent cares, OBGYN, all of those places. We are going to have a sign that says, if you do not feel safe in your environment, or however we're going to word this, and you need to speak to a healthcare provider alone, please put a red dot, and there'll be a red dot there. Please put a red dot on top of your urine sample. That is a way for that person to be able to communicate with their healthcare provider that they need help, but they can't open their mouth right now. Now as a healthcare provider, we have to have a plan if that red dot shows up, right? But that is a way, because if you try to give, like a lot of times there's these little, they call them shoe cards, and they're little cards you can slip into your shoe that have the National Human Trafficking Hotline number on them. But that's, you know, traffickers are very aware of everything. They're watching. So even trying to give somebody a little card like that doesn't always get past the trafficker. And especially I think about summertime, if you've got sandals or flip-flops on, you don't have a shoe to put that card into. You can't hand somebody a business card with that number on it, because what are they going to do with it? And how are they going to hide it from the trafficker? So it has to be something subtle in order for it to work and not put that patient in more danger than they were when they walked in the door to see you. So hopefully that answered the question.
Thank you. And then we have a comment. Someone said that this is very resourceful, and they're thankful for this information.
And we're thankful you're here.
For sure.
Any other questions?
Not seeing any other questions at this time, but please, if anyone has any additional questions, another thank you for all of the information. Awesome. And
please,
yeah,
I was just gonna say, please go to the coalition website. If you do nothing else, go look at the website, because I know you've all put the phone number in your phone now. So this is part 2.
Right.
And truly, if this has, you know, sparked something in you, I would encourage you to join the coalition. It doesn't cost anything. We're all volunteers. You can join committees. There are several of them. There's healthcare, legislative, education, awareness and outreach, and there's probably another one too. But even if you don't want to join the coalition, there's still so much information there, and you can just get on and sign up for the newsletter. So once a month, you're going to get a newsletter, and you'll be able to see what events and activities are happening. There's so much going on, and we have a survivor consultant. Her name is Gina, who works. She's the only paid person on the coalition, and she really is bringing in survivors from all over the United States, not just to share their story, but to share their expertise. And there's been so many events and others that are coming up that, because we're in this virtual world, everything's online. So, you know, and a lot of the time, well, not a lot, I shouldn't say that. Sometimes things get recorded. If there are survivors, they don't typically record them. But a lot of the other things that we've been doing have been recorded and are available on the website, so you can watch it as a recording. And I would just tell you to just really try and learn as much as you can and share it.
awesome. And everyone, I will be sending you the numbers, the website, Diana and Debbie's contact info as well via email in case you have any additional questions. And definitely so you can all, you know, explore more of the resources and figure out how you can incorporate them as peer health educators, as community providers, healthcare providers, whatever your profession may be. And even things, I mean, right, even if people don't typically educate others or work in healthcare, right, this is kind of information that is beneficial for us all to have a better understanding of, being much more informed on trauma and understanding that human trafficking, or I mean, you guys taught me a lot. Every time I think of human trafficking, I think more sex trafficking, but learning more also about that labor trafficking and these different kinds of ways that this can happen is so beneficial, because it opened my eyes a lot. It helps me understand it so much more, and I know that this helps everyone else as well. So everyone knows, I also posted that post survey in the chat box, but I will also send that via email. So you guys have it to complete it within this next week.
That'd be great, because we really are using the data just to see if our presentation is working. You know, are you learning? Are you walking away with more knowledge than you had before you started off? So it's really important for you to finish that out. So thank you.
Yeah. And also even, you know, we're talking about implicit bias. So if we think about it, I'm going to tell a quickie little tale. Do we have time? It's not a tale, but okay. So dad and his son are driving, and unfortunately they're in a terrible car accident. Dad doesn't make it, but the son does, but needs to be rushed to surgery. And they get him into surgery, and the surgeon says, "Oh no, my son." So who is the surgeon?
I don't know.
I don't know either.
Anybody in the audience?
Saying anything in the chat?
Oh, we got, oh wow, everyone's saying the mother. You guys are,
They're absolutely right. Bravo. See, you didn't have that implicit bias that surgeons are men, right?
Yes, I did. I don't really, but still, I didn't go there.
No, but it's just an example of what we would, you know, not even be aware we have. So when we talk about we all have implicit bias, you know, it doesn't mean we walk around with these horrible thoughts about people, but we do have a preconceived notion a lot of times of what is true to us and what we believe. So beginning to challenge that is real helpful. And, you know, because what if the person in front of you is your perpetrator instead of the person who's surviving? You know, how do you look past those horrible behaviors that, wow, this was once someone's baby? You know, this was an innocent child sometime, and what happened in his or her life that led them to the point where they're behaving with such horrific behavior? You know, people just don't automatically turn into villains or victims. You know, usually there's a whole building block of trauma of all different types that really can lead up to, you know, something that's really hard for all of us to wrap our heads around. But it's a reality. Unfortunately, it's out there. So.
Anyone have any other questions or comments or anything you'd like to share?
Looks like we did a good job, Deb.
I guess so.
Awesome. All righty, everyone. Well, thank you all for your time, for your questions, and your participation to today's session. You'll be getting a follow-up email from me with a bunch of resources and contact info. And I will definitely be sure also to keep you all updated whenever we schedule the next webinar to really provide, as Debbie was mentioning, more case studies and opportunities to learn a little bit more and practice some skills. Another comment, great presentation. Thank you so much.
Oh, and there'll be a certificate, right? If everyone does the post survey, right?
Yes, everyone complete that post survey, and then I'll be sure to send you that certificate as well. But yeah, so I guess
We hope some of you will become new members of the coalition.
Wonderful. Alrighty, everyone. Debbie, Diana, any last words before we sign off for today?
No, just thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for this opportunity. We always welcome the chance to get the word out.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for providing new information and also new tools for our peer health educators. I know this is going to be so beneficial for everybody. Oh, we got something else. Thank you so much. Very educational and informative. Awesome. Thank you. I'm glad you guys like this. And please be sure, if you have any questions that come up later on, feel free to email me or Debbie and Diana. I know they're always happy to assist in any way possible as well. Thank you. Oh, you got another thank you. Yeah, the thank yous are coming in. Oh, you don't see that poster, right? No worries. Let me post it in here again. And I'll also send it to your email. It'll probably be a little easier via email then. I'll send that to you once we log off. Alrighty, everyone.
Thanks,
Well, thank you again for your time.
Thanks,
Have a good day,
everybody.
everyone.
Have a good one.
Okay.
Mhm.